my name is Tony. Harry Alan Towers sounds like a substandard British theme or amusement park, but no, he was in fact a real person, a British independent film producer and screenwriter, a prolific one who made low-budget B-grade product with conveyor belt mentality. He's probably best known for the 5 Fu Manchu pictures he made with Christopher Lee in the 60s, and for his work with maverick Spanish film director Jesus Jess Franco, who was a dab hand at exploitation, horror and sex outings. Towers made adventure movies, softcore porn flicks, low-rent spy and murder mysteries. He was always on the lookout for the one big box office bust-in hit that never really came his way. A British Roger Corman minus Corman's uncanny knack for timing and his talent for exploiting the latest craze whilst turning a consistent profit. Again, unlike Corman, he never made anything approximating art cinema either. None of this stopped him trying though, only Death in 2009 did that. Towers often chose projects of a period nature based on classic tales of horror and adventure by long-dead authors like Edgar Allan Poe, Oscar Wilde and Robert Louis Stevenson. Maybe because their work was copyright expired or cheap to rip off. Adapt, I mean. In 1989, with director Gerard Kikoin, with whom Towers had worked on several earlier projects, he co-produced Edge of Sanity. It was a reworking of the Stevenson classic The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, cross-pollinated with the Jack the Ripper murders and legend. A Jekyll and Hyde Jack the Ripper mashup, in other words. Hammer had taken a crack at something similar and enjoyed box office success with their 1971 gender bender Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. This also incorporated the Ripper murders into the mix, as well as corpse botherers Burke and Hare somehow or other. Surely they operated out of Edinburgh way back in 1828, not the Victorian London of 1888, by which time they were corpses themselves. Judging by the halfway decent production values and the presence of a respected and indeed iconic Hollywood star in Anthony Perkins, along with a stylish set and art design, I'd wager this film had more of a budget than most Towers was involved in. I saw it several times on VHS back in the day, and each time it impressed me differently because I kept seeing and picking up on details and aspects I hadn't noticed previously, along with those I experienced over again. So I stored all this crap up in my head, just waiting for the very day when I could do a video review and upload it to YouTube. Yeah, that's not strictly true. I certainly stored all this crap up in my head, but I had no fucking idea there'd ever be anything like YouTube for me to play with. I had no idea what a video review was or how to make one. What do you mean you still don't? Honestly, you do your best and that's the fucking thanks you get. The intro sequence, which turns out to be a dream, sees a young boy hiding in the loft of a barn at night during a thunderstorm. Lightning strobes and flashes. Looking down, he sees a woman partially dressed and behaving enticingly. A man enters quickly, his father at a guess, who is just as quick to enter the woman. Trying to get a better look, the boy falls, his foot entangled in a length of rope. He hangs suspended. Coitus interruptus, daddy-o. Angered, the man beats a suspended boy whilst the woman laughs. Her face turns into a horrible mask of blood. Sounds vaguely familiar. Dr. Henry Jekyll, Anthony Perkins, wakes up in a sweat from this fever dream of his childhood. He's in bed with his wife Elizabeth, Glynis Barber. Jekyll, although a respected scientist with a privileged lifestyle, is nonetheless scarred by his childhood experiences and harbours deep repressed sadomasochistic urges. Experimenting with anesthesia in his home laboratory, his lab monkey spills some ether onto a dish of cocaine. Inhaling the fumes, Jekyll is physically and psychologically transformed into his alter ego, Jack Hyde. Christian name was Edward in Stevenson's novella and most other adaptations. Seems he's just discovered crack cocaine or something similar, and tops himself up by smoking the mixture in a glass pipe. Jekyll's limp has gone, he used to walk with a cane for support, and Hyde looks like a hyped up cross between a raddled dope fiend and a half-dead comic book ghoul, with red-rimmed eyes, a ragged fringe, and a range of twisted facial expressions that could repel an acid attack with their sheer feral ferocity. Just the sort of chap who would indulge to the full the perversions of the bordello, violent fetishism, and the carving up of prostitutes for a giggle. The newspapers attribute the spate of gruesome murders of working girls to a character they have dubbed the Ripper. But as both Jekyll and Hyde spiral into existential conflict, escalating depravity and unrestrained insanity, how long can this reign of terror continue? Edge of Sanity stands out for several stylistic and thematic reasons. The way it looks, the way it's shot, the way it slyly tampers with the perceptions and preconceptions of the audience. The daytime look is close to the Victorian London of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes or equivalent costume drama, but the nighttime scenes shift into a parallel universe when Jekyll becomes Hyde. Is this alteration of the paradigms of reality as a result of the drugs Jekyll ingests, or is the film set in an alternative steampunk reinterpretation of the Victorian era? The dress code of the prostitutes includes bright neon tutus, chrome belt buckles, leather bondage chic, satin and lace, an anachronistic amalgamation of punk, new romantic, goth and Madonna-inspired fashion choices. People didn't dress like that back then, but in this film they do. The cinematography by Tony Spratlin goes for sharp off-kilter angles and intense facial close-ups. It doesn't shy away from capturing the violence and gore in a graphic, full-on, up-close and personal way. There's plenty of flowing, splashing blood, torn flesh and naked breasts on display. The score by French composer Friedrich Talgorn soars and pounds, blaring stridently during the murders. At the time of release, the deliberate anachronisms, such as a new British pound coin being offered to a prostitute for information, were dismissed by critics as careless continuity fuck-ups. This was not the case. They were intentional trigger points employed by director Kikoin to wrong-foot the audience. Now, because these things are implemented in a subtle and matter-of-fact way, initially they are hardly noticed and simply accepted. Then the doubt starts to creep in. What exactly are we watching here? Someone's crazy, drug-induced nightmare, or a modern parallel universe where history's needle got stuck in the groove of the Victorian era and never moved on? It throws up a few fascinating propositions to consider. There is almost as much cocaine in this film as in Scarface. Mounds of it in dishes and bowls in Jekyll's lab. He feeds it by the spoonful to his research monkey, who must be one happy, well-jacked-up primate. It's in the hospital by the bucket load. It's everywhere. A likely comment, then, on the dominance of coke and its corrosive nature. A social critique post-80s war on drugs of the accessible recreational narcotic of choice in the modern age. Whatever, Sherlock Holmes' meager 7% solution makes Henry Jekyll look like the Pablo Escobar of old London town. The other thing of note, the environments all look fastidiously clean, too sanitized. The hospitals and mortuaries are sterile and pristine, bright and gleaming. The streets free of litter, filth and debris. Jekyll's lab, all spotless white tiles and pillars supporting marble busts. There is a scene in a Victorian bathhouse which nowadays strikes me as a homoerotic vision culled from Roman times. Older professional men bathe, white robes adorning them like togas, whilst naked, oiled, sinewy younger men pose languorously and provocatively against tiled walls and soaring pillars. There is an invisible divide between the two groups, one you imagine the privileged older guard can cross at will when the urge takes them. Jekyll is nervous, unsettled, uncomfortable in these surroundings, a reflection of the repression and duality Perkins struggled with in his own personal life perhaps, as well as the Jekyll and Hyde sexual ambiguity. Talking of Perkins, he is let off the leash here and overacts magnificently. Over the top is a fair-minded assessment. He just about manages to be terrifying enough without tipping completely over into absolute parody, only just though. The film's incorporating of Hyde's involvement in a bisexual threesome with the punky pimp Johnny, Ben Cole, and prostitute Susanna, Sarah Moore Ward, may have allowed Perkins space to apply some of his own life experiences. The duality of the human psyche is always a potent and intriguing consideration. We all repress feelings and behaviours, what we really are, what we really want to do. The eternal attraction of the Jekyll and Hyde story lies in the what if. What if there were no restraints, no rules, no restrictions or conventions to which we felt bound to adhere? Wouldn't we all be monsters? The simple answer to that question is Mr. Hyde. So, yes then. It's played out like a melodramatic pantomime nightmare, and the overwrought, underwritten script and dialogue remains at that level of articulation throughout. The influence of Ken Russell, The Devil's Crimes of Passion, can be detected in the inclusion of supernatural, psychological and sexual imagery, making prominent use of religious iconography, the nun fetish cubicle in the bordello, the jewelled crosses worn by prostitutes as earrings and necklaces. These working girls laugh way too much as well. I never thought of it as the most hilarious of professions, but these chicks guffaw, cackle and howl with laughter at the drop of a dildo. It can get to be a little grating. Then there's the abrupt and unexpected ending. I'm gonna spoil it now, so fast forward or skip if you want to. Elizabeth tracks Hyde to the attic hangout of prostitute Susanna, where she finds Johnny striped up, beaten, and hanging by his feet from a rope. Susanna sits beside him high on drugs and at this point hopelessly insane. She's laughing maniacally, for a change. There's a surprise. Is Hyde reenacting Jekyll's childhood trauma by hanging Johnny up like that? I would think that's the intended impression. Hyde appears and cuts Johnny down, then engaging in three-way sexual activity with him and Susanna, whilst Elizabeth looks on appalled. Johnny attacks Elizabeth with a scalpel, but Hyde intervenes and strangles Johnny whilst Elizabeth wisely runs for it. After making it home, Elizabeth hears noises, then a gunshot from her husband's laboratory. Entering, she finds Hyde shot and bleeding on the floor. However, he isn't dead, rises malevolently, and violently murders her ass with a scalpel. Jekyll calls in the police inspector working the Ripper case. The unimaginative cop concludes that Elizabeth was yet another victim of old Jack D. Ripper, which realistically she was. As the detective walks away, Jekyll watches him go from behind the curtains. The camera freezes. That's the end. The villain gets away with it in this one, folks. Edge of Sanity is nuts, but in a good way. I'm not going to tell you it's a great piece of cinema because it isn't. It is, however, something that does enough to elevate itself from the mire of the deep and mindless end of the intellectually bottom-feeding B-movie swamp. It does things differently and aims to dazzle and thought-provoke with an approach to the subject matter that, although often absurd, does things in certain ways that border on innovation. It's perverse, bloody and unpleasant, with little interest in character development or making much of the moral points regarding the treatment and exploitation of women in a very patriarchal society. The prostitutes are little more than flesh ciphers headed for the blade, objectified as the recipients of sex violence and drawn as non-empathic sources of titillation. If that makes your decision about whether to watch or not, then job done. Any hypersensitive souls will find this is not the sort of thing that's going to be right up their back alley. If, however, you are a horror fan who has an interest in the alternative perspective, then it may put a light under your metaphoric crack pipe. Thank you with gratitude for your time and attention. Breathe deeply and do whatever you want to do next. Hit like, don't like, comment, subscribe, be a patron of my Patreon thing, make a financial contribution via the thanks button. As usual, one of us will get back to you soon, but you never know which one you're going to get these days, do you? Take care for now, pilgrims.